Hi, my name is Nikki, and this is The Interventionalists, and I want to talk about the concept of lesbian as a gender, or I guess, like, in a broader way, the concept of experiencing gender within a patriarchy while not fulfilling your supposed socialized gender role or norms, and the way that that changes, like, your experience or your perception of gender in general. And I'm thinking about this because the concept of lesbian as a gender is not new. It's just something that I only recently came across. It's been written about by a lot of lesbian feminists. Monique Wittig has written a lot about it. And I only came across any of that kind of like lesbian feminist philosophy about like lesbian as a gender only in the past like couple months. But I really haven't stopped thinking about it because over the past few years, I feel like my relationship to womanhood is a lot less, I guess I would say, strong as my relationship is to lesbianism. And it also has started to feel like my identity as a woman and my identity as a lesbian, and those two experiences are mutually exclusive. Like, I don't feel like I see or understand womanhood or developed a sense of womanhood outside of my lesbianism or outside of the influence of my lesbianism. And because of that, I feel like my perception of womanhood is just not what I think straight people experience. I think gender is a construct, right? Like, that's just a fact. Gender is a construct. I mean, there's a quote by Simone de Beauvoir, like, make sure say it correctly. It's one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Gender is constructed in society, in our world. And depending on the culture you're raised in, the part of the world that you're raised in, your specific circumstance, all these different like aspects of growing up and your environment can impact the kind of woman you're constructed into or your experience of being constructed into a woman. It'll not look the same for any woman. It'll look different for every woman. And while it is a construct, there still is something about it that is so sort of like undeniably innate, or at the very least, like there is a very, very deep, intimate attachment between ourselves and gender. Not everyone, but at least in my case, I experienced that. And I also know I'm not alone in it because I did do some research on this. And there are a few studies that pretty much confirm that. Like, I'll put below too, like the articles, the research articles. But here is one that talks about, it was a study, they were studying Butch and Femme and Androgynous and other women. That's like what it says. And it says 90% of the participants felt that their gender expression was at least partially an innate characteristic. And another one, a different study, said survey, interview, and physiological research have documented that these lesbian genders are experienced as having innate components as well as components that are culturally constructed. And while we evolve as people, and I'm sure like our understanding of gender will evolve, and maybe if we become like a more progressive society and like kind of deconstruct like the institution of gender altogether, maybe this will completely change one day. But as of right now, like I think there's many of us who still feel this like very innate pull to womanhood, and I'm one of those people, despite the fact that like my understanding of it sometimes makes me feel like maybe I'm not one. And it's just because I have been like raised in a way to see like womanhood almost at this point as like a very strict institution, and veering away from it like makes me feel like I veered off a little bit. Like maybe like, yes, like I am a woman, like I identify as one. And I think of it very much as like, you know, that there's a line from Rene Descartes, it's I think therefore I am. I think of it as like I feel therefore I am when it comes to like gender identity. If you feel like a woman, you are a woman. That's really all there is to it. And I feel like a woman, but I feel like I veered a little bit to the left or something. Like I'm still on the same path. I'm just like a little bit over. And that's where it like kind of confuses me because I do still feel that like, I don't know, that like innate connection. And I don't know. I wonder like if that's just attachment. Like, am I just attached to something that I've always had that I can't imagine a life outside of it? But at the same time, like, I think a lot of it comes from the fact, like, as a lesbian, and I feel like this will probably depend on like when you became aware of your sexuality, right? Because in the studies I was just talking about, there's a lot of studies on like how, in particular, femmes seemed to become aware of their sexuality, like their sexual orientation, like later than, because it was between like studies on butches and femmes than like butches. So I think it also is dependent on like when you became aware of your sexuality and things like that. But I became very aware of the way that I was, now I would use this word, gay as a kid when I hit like 7 years old. Like the first time you can have like a crush, like when you start to like have crushes on people, I had crushes on girls. And like I look back now and I've never had a crush on a boy. Like I've always had crushes on girls, and by the time I hit like age 12, I was like looking myself in the mirror and I had learned the word gay, and I'm not even kidding you. I looked in the mirror and I was like, there's something different about you. And then I said, oh my God, I said, you're gay, to see what it would look like if I said it out loud to myself in the mirror. And then I got really sad and scared and didn't say the word out loud for a long time because I knew it was true. It was like the first time I learned the word and I knew it was true. And I was just like hyper aware of the fact that I was different, and I knew that this thing that made me different was causing me to like grow up differently than the girls that I was friends with, who now have like grown up into women who, because of where I grew up, are like getting married and having children. Very small town, very like conservative, traditional. There was like 8 kids in my class in general, so there's very few girls. So I didn't have like a wide pool of people to even compare to. And they were all very like traditional girls, like traditional families. And I became very aware of my differentness, I guess, my otherness, like very young. And I was also very aware of the way that that wasn't okay. Like I could pick up on it, you know? And then once the word gay became a thing, the slurs followed. So I knew that it wasn't something that I was supposed to be. And I continued to grow up and experience girlhood, like you would say that, like the experience of girlhood with other girls. And I watched them grow up and follow that straight path. At least it looked like it to me. And they did it all from the outside. It looked perfect. And they had crushes on boys. And they wanted to like look and dress all the ways in which like a young girl dresses who's going to grow up into like a beautiful woman, you know, like all of these traditional thoughts. And I watched them do it, and I felt myself inside like constantly wonder like what was wrong with me, and why I felt like I was like role playing to be correct. Like I don't know how to explain it other than like I felt like a counterfeit. I felt like a counterfeit girl, but not because I didn't feel like a girl, because I was missing such a huge aspect of what at that point in my life tradition had taught me womanhood meant, which was to be straight and to be something to a man. And I've watched all these other girls grow up around me, and it seemed so easy for them, and it wasn't easy for me. And I felt like the very like gut-wrenching internal pressure and like tension that comes with trying really hard to fix whatever is wrong with you or understand why it's wrong with you, but not really knowing how or even really what's wrong with you. But I guess what I never really considered is how much that one thing that was like wrong with me, my lesbianness, like sort of like rippled out and colored every other aspect of my life and my identity, and shaped it, just because it was so astringent to my childhood experience. I think maybe if I grew up in a more progressive area and womanhood was always something that was shown in like a liberal manner, like it wasn't such a strict, like a traditional idea, I think I probably would feel differently. And if I didn't grow up somewhere really homophobic and it didn't feel like something that I had to think about all the time because I was trying to figure out how to fix it in my head, then I also think it probably would have affected all other aspects of my identity a lot less, because I wouldn't be thinking about it in relation to every other aspect of me. So like, I guess I'll put this into perspective. I grew up being very aware that there was something wrong with me. And so I was thinking about it all the time, because I felt like if I didn't figure out how to figure this shit out, I was going to fall behind in all the things that I didn't want to fall behind in, which was like growing up and being like, I'm a little kid at this point, right? Like being like a pretty girl and like going to prom and like having a boyfriend and one day like growing up and all these things, like all these ideas that are placed in your head that I didn't want, but I was like, I need to want them. And I also want to be close to people and be close to friends and to have like be close to other girls and like really understand them and feel like they understand me. But I was also aware of this like very hyper specific thing, and it was my attraction to women that was preventing that, or at least preventing it from feeling authentic to me. And so it was like always on my mind, because I think as people we tend to have, I think we're a collaborative species. I think that we like connection, and I think that we like being close to people. And I, like any other kid, wanted that. And I was very aware of the thing about me that was preventing me from feeling like I could get close to people, because they didn't know this thing about me that felt so huge. Because it also felt like a big secret that was going to ruin my life. So it even felt like more pressure, you know? And then also because I knew that there was a really good chance if people did know this about me, I'd be sort of othered and outsider and then have no opportunity for connection. So it was just on my mind all the time. And instead, like, I felt like I needed to overcompensate in like womanhood. Like I needed to like figure out how to be just that. Because to me, like, being a lesbian, being this aspect of myself that felt defective was going to get in the way of that, and that's what I needed to be. And so I grew up very aware of like having a goal. Like, I don't know how to explain it, of like being a woman, like being a what it means to be a woman, like, was a goal for me. And not a goal in like necessarily like I hated it. Like, it made me like, because I've gotten a comment on a video once where somebody was talking about their experience, like being raised as a woman, but they're not a woman. They do not identify as a woman. And they essentially said that like it felt traumatic for them. That's not how it felt for me. Like, my experience of being raised as a woman wasn't traumatic. It was the intent to which I had to focus on developing my womanhood in a way that like was inauthentic to me in order to still feel like I could connect with other people. Because I was shutting off a whole aspect of my identity. And I think womanhood, if in anything, I guess it's an aspect of you, but it really is supposed to be like a whole you, right? Like a kind of like an umbrella term for all of you. I was shutting off a huge aspect of my identity, which was my sexuality. And so my womanhood was like me trying to cut off one piece to be the right one to connect with other women. And it wasn't necessarily traumatic. It just was confusing and exhausting and isolating. And it also made me feel very like incorrect. Like, I'm doing this wrong. I actually got a comment on my last video about misogyny and desire that like I couldn't stop thinking about, because I thought it was so something I really related to. And it says, what does womanhood even mean if it's not being heterosexual and feminine? I feel like the only thing tying me to womanhood is this personal importance of womanhood as a concept. And I feel like that I really resonate with that idea. Like, to me, like, womanhood, I guess that's the perfect way to put it. Like, when I was younger, and less so now, because I like exist in a more fluid place, like where you can exist more fluidly, and I understand fluidity, and like have the opportunity to be fluid if I wish to be. But I feel like womanhood was a concept that was a very important concept, like a very important personal concept, and because of that, it was not something that I could not hold on to, and I couldn't like afford, if I wanted to like have what I was raised to think would be like a good life, or even just in general connections to other people, friendships, love, and relationships, I couldn't afford to lose womanhood, because then I would be othered to the point where like, what else am I going to be then? This is all I know, and I'm already not doing it that well. And so then I don't know, I tried to be like what a woman looked like in TV, and what a woman looked like in my hometown, like all the different ways that I could, while also knowing that every time I tried, I would always be like, felt like I was kind of like disassociating, just wondering if everyone else felt this way, like felt kind of weird about all of this. And so much of it like was tied back to my sexuality and the way that I even like perceived women. And I think part of that is because, I don't know, maybe it's a thing of youth. Maybe it was like particularly where I was from. I don't know. Girls like always had crushes on guys. And so like I watched them grow up, and it was so formative. And we experienced girlhood together, right? Like the concept of girlhood together. But I watched them all have crushes on guys, and so much of their choices and experiences then and like their development started to like focus around that, like wanting to wear this because they think this boy would like this, and doing this because like they have a crush on this boy, right? Like so much of it like started to focus on boys. And that's when I started to feel more and more like almost like disassociated from all of it. And it's not because womanhood is that womanhood is that like is attached to heterosexuality. It's just in my environment it was. And I think a lot of us do experience that. And I think the media promotes that womanhood being like part of the institution that is heterosexuality. And I do think that like there's an ideology that accompanies being a woman or the concept of woman. And I think that it's because of that, like as I got older, my attraction to women in particular, like my lesbianness felt like such an othering aspect of me that like there was some distance that like cut between us. And it's not that we aren't both women, it's that our understanding and like our most formative years, the things that really influenced us were not the same. Mine was like an isolation by not understanding why this aspect of my identity could fulfill like what I was supposed to be while still like retaining like a connection to that aspect like of womanhood, like still feeling that innate connection versus like a lot of the straight girls that I grew up with, or all of the straight girls that I grew up with, their identity started to develop and they never questioned that, and they went and they dated boys and they had a lot of fun and they went to prom and they did a lot of the very stereotypically traditional feminine things. And I watched them like spend their formative years developing that way, and I saw myself on the outside not sure why I couldn't or what was wrong with me. And I think because of that, being a lesbian and being a woman have become like mutually exclusive to me. And I also feel like it's something to do with the fact that like, I don't know, to me like lesbian feels like a good enough identifier because it just assumes the fact of the matter, which is that I'm not a man, because a lesbian is just not a man loving not a man. So it's like a mouthful of a sentence. But then to me, I'm like, okay, well then that's all I really need is lesbian to identify it, because like that's the whole point. And again, like, I don't know, I do feel a connection to womanhood, but at the same time, like, my connection to gender is not that, what would the word be? It does not feel that rigid or strict, you know? Like, I feel like the concept of womanhood is not something that, like, is a rigid or strict thing. So I don't really care about like if it's interpreted fluidly, because I think that womanhood, people can have attachments to womanhood and not be women. You know what I mean? Like I saw a video the other day of I don't remember who it was. I wish I could like remember the name. But of this person, they made a video on TikTok, and essentially they were talking about how like they're non-binary, but they still feel very connected to womanhood because the world perceives them as a woman, so they still feel that connection. I'll see if I can find the person who posted that. But I feel like I understand it that way, even though I do genuinely still feel like a connection to womanhood. Like, I see it more as something that, like, a lot of people can touch and understand based on their experiences in many different ways. And it's not something that's reliant on somebody necessarily identifying as a woman. Like, womanhood is not a gate-kept thing to people who just identify as a woman, I guess. So, like, my idea of gender just like is not rigid at all. Like, I just don't think of it rigidly at all. And maybe that's why being a lesbian like fits more too, because I think being a lesbian is like playing with gender norms and like gender and traditionality in many different ways. I mean, there was one quote from an article that I thought was good. Okay, here it is. It's about political lesbianism. It said, the political lesbianism movement was founded under which lesbianism was not so much based upon sexual desire as upon motives to eradicate gender oppression. Lesbian desire was predicated upon partner sameness and the absence of gender and power differences associated with gender. I feel like that's how I understand gender and lesbianism. And like, I do feel an attachment to womanhood and I am a woman, but like, I feel like I only feel an attachment to womanhood in a setting where womanhood is not gatekept by like traditional standards or like any rigidity, if that makes sense. Like, I only understand womanhood if it can be fluid, if that makes sense. Like, as something that I used to only understand could be as traditional, now I don't, it doesn't make sense to me if it is. I just don't like understand, I guess, the rigidity of it. And I think because of that, identifying like as a lesbian as a gender just almost feels more natural to me. But in addition to that, I think part of the reason that's solidified is when people talk about, when straight women talk about womanhood, I'll be like, no, like I'm a woman, like I know what that means. I know what the experience of womanhood is. And then I listen to straight women talk about it and suddenly I don't know what the fuck. And then I feel like I don't really know what being a woman means anymore. And I think that there's like experiences that we all share as women, like women, like no matter what, like no matter where we are, we do experience some forms of often misogyny or oppression. Womanhood is not defined by those things for many different reasons, but also because the kind of oppression and misogyny that women face will always be different. Like it'll be like your class, if you're in the 1%, is going to different than if you're impoverished, or like race will impact the misogyny you experience. There's trans misogyny. There's so many different kinds of misogyny that women experience. Like it's not indicative of womanhood at all. Like it's not what determines womanhood. And I know that. So like I know that womanhood can like vary, but when I hear like straight people talk about womanhood, I feel more and more distant from the idea of it. Or even like more and more every single day, more and more distant from any traditional understanding of womanhood that I like was once raised with, and I still will see in the media. I don't really like have friends that are like that. Most of my friends are lesbians and like genderqueer. And then suddenly I feel like I don't know what it means to be a woman at all when they talk about it, because it just feels like so rigid. I don't know. Like it just feels like so, or they like look so, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it other than it doesn't feel like it makes sense. And I once again feel like the kid who's on the outside who's like, no, but like I'm a girl too. Why do I feel weird? Why are we all girls here right now and yet I feel weird? And not just because I'm gay. Like, maybe it is just because I'm gay. But, like, why do I feel weird right now? And I still feel that way when I'm around straight women. I'm like, suddenly I don't feel like a woman. Like, now I don't feel like a woman. Like, you're making me not feel like a woman. And they're not doing anything other than being who they are. But for some reason, it feels so wildly different. Like, it's in a whole other world that I don't know. There was, like, one thing I was reading. I think that it was, I wish I had this quote. I don't remember what it was. Actually, wait, 1 second. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, I can't find the quote that I'm looking for, but here's another one that from Wittig that I also think is a little bit helpful or like relevant here. And it says, marginalized by both men and straight women, lesbians are exiled into a space beyond sex and gender, a queer space. Therefore, a woman has to be something else, a not woman, a not man. I feel like we're a special third thing, but I also feel like that's true for all queer people. Like you're kind of like a special third thing. And like, I think that's also like very binary thinking, but I understand that, especially like from the perspective of like child me, that is how it felt. Like, I felt like I was kind of exiled, but not like in a way that I couldn't like still participate. It just internally felt like I was sort of disassociating because I was aware of being exiled and they didn't know that they were exiling me because they weren't aware of the ways in which their beliefs and their systems that were causing me to have to like sort of exile the part of myself that is authentic to me in order to maintain relationships with them. But the quote I was looking for was essentially talking about how lesbians, like everything is defined in like heterosexual language, and that can be like difficult for lesbians. And I feel like that may be what it is. Like when I am around a bunch of straight women, like I feel like sometimes they're speaking a different language. And I also think it depends like on the straight woman. Like I don't want to generalize, but I do like, I don't know, this is why I'm making this whole video. I just feel different from it. I don't really resonate. And I don't know if I ever really have, but the more that I spend out of the closet and in the queer community, and I'm really only like have queer friends for the most part, like the farther and farther that I feel like I relate to that original idea of woman that I was ever presented at all. Even though a woman can be anything and everything that she wants to be, I still feel like I'm a little bit on the outside looking in, but still feel very connected to the concept of womanhood. I feel like for me, what defines womanhood is my ability to connect with and understand other people similar to me. That is how I would define my womanhood. And I don't know what that means, because who is similar to me and who is not similar to me, I guess, is dependent on the interaction. But it's usually lesbians and other women and other sapphics. So maybe that's something to be said for it. I don't know. But that's how I would define my experience of womanhood. I think I relate more to that word than I do to the term, like the institution I feel like that I associate in my head with women. But I understand the idea of womanhood, which I imagine as like that communal like connection, that connection to other people, that understanding, that sort of like I see you, like when you see another woman, it's like I see you. Someone tells you they're a woman, I see you, you know? Like there's like this almost innate understanding. I guess that's like a bit of what womanhood is to me. I guess it's like that understanding of another person similar to me, that shares that like similar internal experience. That is what womanhood means to me, but I just don't see that like defined in any sort of rigid terms. And that doesn't look like anything particularly good, like particular on the outside either. I feel like both gender and heterosexuality, I feel like if you're like a child, I kind of imagine it like you're getting shot twice, like two guns, you're getting shot twice, and it's kind of like you have these two bullets in you, like from childhood on, and like you grow with them. And I think some people, depending on their experience, like are never aware of them at all. And I think you have, depending on a lot of your, like depending on your identities, if you have multiple identities, you probably have different bullets in you. But in this case, one is gender and one is heterosexuality. Like you grow up and some people are never aware of it. Like they don't feel it. Like you can't get it taken out, because if you get it taken out, then you'll bleed to death, because that's sometimes what happens when you have wounds. Like if you get stabbed in the leg, you're not always supposed to like pull it out, because it's too dangerous and you might actually hurt yourself worse. You just like leave it in. And I think some people like are never aware of it. They don't even feel it. It's just like, oh, okay, like whatever. You'd have to like really point it out that it's still there, and then maybe they can kind of feel it, whatever. I think other people always are like aware that it's there, like maybe kind of playing with it, like they can feel like that like bullet on like the inside of their body if they like rub it on their skin. They can feel it, but it doesn't like hurt or anything necessarily. They're just like aware of it. And then I think some people it's like very, very, very painful, and for different reasons, like whether it's really painful or maybe you're just someone who like is kind of aware of it and you want to change things, to deconstruct it, like I guess in this case would be taking the bullet out with like a surgical precision to like remove this huge aspect of your identity at the risk of losing what you once were, like the life you once had. Like maybe you're gonna bleed a lot or something, but it like if I stop being metaphorical, like you take the bullet out, whatever it was that I felt like gender, like that was attached to you, probably like or not actually of your own volition. It takes like a lot of reconstructing no matter what, because at the end of the day, it is a construct. And even if you still feel innately connected to it, like I do, it is and will always still be a construct. And you have to reconstruct your idea of that gender on your own terms. And maybe that means you take the bullet out and you realize like, oh, it's none of that. It's actually none of these things. And if it's any of these things, it's a word that doesn't exist yet. Because at the end of the day, we're all using language that is the only language that we have available for experiences that are so subjective. There's like infinite amount of experiences related to these kind of things. We just don't have enough language to explain them, right? So we stick to the few words we do have. Sometimes it can feel really constricting. And then I think other times, like I think in my case, I still feel that connection. I just do. Maybe it almost feels like more spiritual at this point than it does anything else, like the politics of being a woman. But deconstructing it, and also the construction of it, has been very dependent on my lesbian identity. My identity as a woman was hindered. My growth as a woman was hindered by my lesbianism, because it separated me pretty immediately, because I was aware of it very early on, and I watched these other girls like fulfill and form into what we were supposed to be. And my now as I'm older, and I really want to deconstruct at least the rigidity of my understandings of gender, I still feel connected to it, but that connection still feels very, very like astringent on my lesbian identity. I just feel I just feel very attached to it. Maybe that's why. But I can see why people use lesbian as a gender. I wish it's like the easiest one to describe. And people who get mad about it being like an identity thing, that's fine. If you grew up in an environment where it wasn't something you even had to think about, like your sexuality, even if you were gay and you were lucky, I envy you, and I hope everyone gets to have that experience one day. But I think that's why it's so big to me. I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's it. I don't want to ramble too much. But yeah, I think like the important thing to remember about gender and like your identity is, I really think it's a I feel therefore I am situation. Like you never have to explain to anyone. Like I'm obviously thinking this out loud, probably overthinking, but you never have to think harder about it if you feel like something, you are something, and that's all that matters. And whatever makes you feel the most comfortable and authentic to yourself is the most important thing. And you can reconstruct and deconstruct as many times as you want to become whatever makes you feel the most comfortable. And yeah, you don't always have to think more about it. I'm thinking about it a lot, but it doesn't always have to be something you think so hard about, you know, as long as you just feel happy and safe. That's really all that matters at the end of the day. But I do think thinking about it can help us get to a place where we can like construct our own ideas around gender that don't feel like we're restricted in a way that can feel really like limiting and sometimes miserable for people. My computer's like gonna die and it records my audio. So, okay, yeah, that's it. I'm just gonna end it here. I will say this. I post videos on TikTok and Instagram if you're interested. And I have a website. I write on there if you are interested in that. But more importantly, I have submissions. I'll put my email down below, but there's also a link to a page on my website where you can send submissions. If you've literally thoughts on, I'm worried my computer's gonna die. If you have thoughts on anything related to this, literally this topic, anything, I would love to hear it. Genuinely, I would be so honored to hear it. Like getting comments on my last video, I sat and read so many because I found them so interesting, and a lot of it like inspired this, like had me thinking and like learning a lot about myself. I just feel very grateful to be able to hear other people's experiences. So if you feel comfortable sharing, I'd be honored to hear it. I can also publish it on my website if you want potentially other people to see it, or you could send it to me. Yeah, I guess that's it. I'm gonna end it here. The next video I'm gonna make is gonna be about the concepts of masculine and femme and sapphic relationships. So I guess I'll say that. I have like a little like viewfinder on this camera, and I'm realizing there's so much orange between this sweater and this and that. Okay, that's it. Okay, yeah, that's it. Bye.